In 1938, Carl Jung treated a man who was convinced everyone around him was manipulative and scheming. His wife had left, colleagues avoided him, students feared him, yet he saw himself as morally pure, the only honest person in a world of deception. Jung told him something that shattered his reality: "You're not seeing their darkness. You're seeing your own." This is shadow projection, the most dangerous psychological pattern, because the person doing it is absolutely convinced they're right. If you've ever been accused of intentions you don't have with absolute certainty, if someone has been convinced about your motives, despite your reality contradicting their perception, you've encountered shadow projection. Jung discovered this isn't just dysfunction, it's misattributed pattern recognition. The same sensitivity that makes you see threats everywhere can become your superpower once you learn to distinguish projection from accurate perception. This video explores Jung's discovery through a patient's complete transformation from seeing manipulation everywhere to developing integrated perception. We reveal the neuroscience behind projection mechanisms, 5 practical techniques for shadow integration, and 3 signals for identifying whether someone has done this work or is still projecting unconsciously. Historical examples: Nietzsche condemned resentment in others while his work revealed his own resentment, ending in catatonic collapse. Jung documented his own shadow work, showing how he projected power, seeking onto Freud before integration. After integration, he founded analytical psychology. Modern CEO example demonstrates how acknowledging projected qualities transforms leadership. There is one sign in a person that reveals deep inner danger. It is not anger. It is not fear. It is emotional numbness, the state when nothing moves you anymore. When a person stops feeling, they stop living. When a person stops reflecting, they stop growing. This is the silent death of the soul. Carl Jung taught that every symptom carries meaning. Emotional numbness means your inner world is collapsing under repression. You have buried your true feelings, your instincts, your pain. And what you bury does not die. It turns into shadow. History shows this truth. The worst atrocities were not committed by the emotional, but by the detached. People who lost empathy and acted from cold intellect or blind obedience. When you suppress emotion, you also suppress conscience. You become efficient, but not human. The journey of healing begins when you dare to feel again. When you face the chaos within, you reclaim your vitality. You cannot become whole by avoiding darkness. You become whole by integrating it. The most dangerous sign is not rage, weakness, or sadness. It is the absence of inner fire. Because when the fire dies, the shadow rules. People become numb when pain becomes too much to bear. The psyche shuts down emotions to protect itself. It builds a wall so the person can continue functioning. On the surface, they appear calm, strong, and in control. Inside, they are disconnected from life. This is not strength. It is survival. Carl Jung observed that the unconscious mind protects itself from overload. When trauma, shame, or rejection become too intense, the psyche cuts off feeling. This defense helps the person survive in the moment, but it costs them their vitality. They lose contact with instinct, joy, and love. The same wall that blocks pain also blocks pleasure. Over time, this emotional shutdown becomes a way of living. The person stops noticing beauty. They avoid relationships that stir emotion. They confuse peace with emptiness. They no longer feel deeply moved by anything. What began as a defense turns into a prison. In therapy, Jung saw that such people were not cold by nature. They were once sensitive. Their sensitivity made them vulnerable. They felt too much, too early, and without guidance. The mind then created numbness as armor, but an armor that never comes off slowly suffocates the soul. Real healing begins when the person dares to feel again. When they let sadness surface without running. When they face the grief behind the numbness. Feeling again hurts at first, but it is the return of life energy. The defense once saved you, but now you must lay it down. You cannot evolve while living behind a wall. The shadow is born the moment you reject a part of yourself. Every emotion, thought, or impulse you deny moves into the unconscious. It does not disappear. It waits. Jung described the shadow as everything you refuse to acknowledge about yourself. It holds the traits you call unacceptable, the anger you suppress, the envy you deny, the desires you fear. Over time, this hidden side begins to shape your behavior from below the surface. When you say, "I am not like that," you create a split. The conscious mind builds an image of who you want to be, while the shadow collects what does not fit that image. This inner division drains energy. You spend more time defending your self-image than living honestly. You become rigid and judgmental because you cannot tolerate in others what you have disowned in yourself. Jung saw the shadow not as evil but as potential. It is raw life force waiting to be integrated. Many artists, leaders, and thinkers found their power by confronting their shadow instead of denying it. When you face your darkness, you discover strength, creativity, and passion that repression had buried. Ignoring the shadow keeps you controlled by what you refuse to see. History shows this truth in collective form. When societies deny their aggression, fear, or prejudice, those forces do not vanish, they erupt through violence, war, or discrimination. What is not faced within the individual becomes projected onto the world. People begin to see enemies outside instead of conflict inside. This is how collective shadows destroy civilizations. To face your shadow is to reclaim your humanity. It is the hardest work because it demands radical honesty. You must see the parts of yourself you have avoided for years, but only then can you act from awareness instead of reaction. Integration does not mean becoming perfect, it means becoming whole. The shadow loses its power once you bring it into light. When individual shadows remain unconscious, they combine into what Jung called the collective shadow. This is the dark undercurrent of a society, the accumulation of denied fears, hatreds, and instincts. It hides beneath culture, religion, and politics. It surfaces when collective stress or crisis removes the thin layer of civilization. The same dynamic that happens in one person happens in millions at once. The results are destructive on a massive scale. History reveals this pattern clearly. In the early 20th century, Europe faced deep humiliation, economic collapse, and identity loss after war. Instead of facing pain and guilt, nations projected their shadow onto outsiders. They created enemies to carry their darkness. The rise of fascism and genocide was not born from one leader's madness alone. It emerged from a collective refusal to confront internal weakness and rage. People preferred illusion over responsibility. The collective shadow feeds on silence and conformity. When citizens stop questioning authority, when they accept dehumanization in the name of order, the shadow grows stronger. Jung warned that mass movements often promise purity and strength but hide resentment and fear beneath. Every time a group claims moral superiority while condemning others as evil, the shadow is speaking. You can see it not only in history but in everyday life. When nations blame immigrants for economic problems, when political groups dehumanize opponents, when religion turns faith into exclusion, the same psychological law operates. The collective shadow becomes visible in prejudice, propaganda, and persecution. Jung believed that healing the world begins with healing the individual. When people integrate their own darkness, they become less vulnerable to manipulation. They stop needing to project their guilt or fear onto others. Conscious individuals create conscious societies, but when most people remain divided within, the collective shadow rules from the background, waiting for the right moment to erupt. To prevent history from repeating, you must take responsibility for your inner world. Recognize the hatred, envy, and fear that live in you. Do not project them outward, understand them. This awareness weakens the collective shadow. The greatest defense against mass destruction is psychological maturity. When enough individuals become conscious, the collective begins to heal. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, of uniting your conscious mind with the unconscious. Jung saw it as the central task of life, the journey toward the true self. When individuation is blocked, the person remains trapped in imitation. They live through roles and masks, never meeting their own essence. Emotional numbness, repression, and social conditioning all block this path. Many people mistake adaptation for growth. They learn to please, to perform, to fit into systems that reward conformity. The ego becomes dominant, believing it must control everything, but individuation begins only when the ego surrenders to something deeper. When a person starts listening to the voice of the unconscious, the blocked individual resists this call. They fear change. They fear what they might discover inside, so they stay busy, distracted, and detached. Jung describes such people as spiritually asleep. Their lives are predictable but empty. They follow outer success while inner purpose fades. This blockage often shows as anxiety, depression, or a constant sense of meaninglessness. The psyche tries to push for integration through suffering. Pain becomes the signal that growth is being resisted. In history and culture, blocked individuation creates societies of imitation. People think the same, desire the same, and consume the same. They value image over authenticity. The individual self dissolves into collective identity. Jung warned that this collective conformity makes people easy to control. When you avoid your own unconscious, others will fill that space with ideology or propaganda. The path toward individuation demands courage. It begins when you stop blaming circumstances and turn inward. You start asking difficult questions. Who am I beyond my roles? What do I truly value? What parts of me have I ignored? Each answer opens a new layer of consciousness. Integration means accepting contradictions within yourself, not erasing them. Individuation cannot be forced, but it can be chosen. Every honest reflection, every confrontation with fear, moves you closer to your center. The block begins to dissolve when you honor both your light and your shadow. You stop living as an image and start living as a soul. This is the transformation Jung called becoming who you truly are. Loss of empathy is one of the clearest signs that the psyche has disconnected from its center. Empathy allows you to sense the reality of another person's inner world. It bridges the distance between self and other. When empathy fades, that bridge collapses. You stop feeling the pain or joy of others. You start seeing people as functions, obstacles, or threats. What remains is a cold efficiency that can justify anything. Jung saw this loss not as moral failure alone, but as a symptom of psychological imbalance. When emotion is repressed, the heart becomes numb. The intellect takes control, but without feeling, thought becomes dangerous. A person can reason their way into cruelty when conscience is silent. History confirms this pattern. Bureaucrats of totalitarian regimes often committed horrors without hatred. They followed orders and obeyed systems. Their empathy had shut down long before their humanity did. Loss of empathy also appears in everyday life. In relationships, it turns connection into performance. People listen only to reply, not to understand. In work, it creates ambition without compassion. In society, it breeds indifference to suffering. Screens replace faces, and numbers replace names. When empathy disappears, isolation grows. The world becomes mechanical, and the soul becomes irrelevant. Jung believed empathy depends on self-knowledge. You can only feel another's pain if you have faced your own. The person who denies their own wounds cannot recognize them in others. They project weakness outward and judge it harshly. But once you confront your own vulnerability, you begin to see the humanity in everyone. True empathy rises from integration, not sentimentality. The return of empathy begins with presence. It starts when you listen without defense, when you allow another person's experience to exist beside your own. It grows when you stop seeing others as extensions of your desires or fears. Every act of genuine understanding restores part of the human bond. Societies that lose empathy decay from within. No law or technology can replace the moral intelligence that comes from feeling. When people no longer care, they become instruments of systems rather than conscious beings. Jung warned that the danger of modern civilization is the triumph of intellect over soul. The remedy is not more information, but deeper awareness. To recover empathy, you must first reconnect with yourself. You must feel what you once avoided. Only then can you see others clearly. Empathy is not weakness. It is the proof that consciousness is alive and connected to life. The mask of control forms when the ego fears losing power. It appears as composure, discipline, and authority, but underneath it hides insecurity and fear of chaos. A person wearing this mask believes that strength means control, that emotions are weakness, and that vulnerability is danger. This belief becomes their shield against uncertainty. They try to manage people, feelings, and outcomes to avoid inner collapse. Jung saw this pattern often. The more rigid a person appeared, the more turmoil existed beneath the surface. Control is not peace, it is tension disguised as order. When someone lives only through control, spontaneity dies. They suppress emotion to maintain an image of stability. The result is a life that looks calm but feels lifeless. The psyche cannot breathe in such confinement. The mask of control often develops early. A child who grew up in chaos learns that safety means order. They build control to survive. As adults, they repeat the same defense even when danger is gone. They control work, relationships, and emotions to feel secure. But what once protected them now limits their growth. Real life cannot be controlled, it can only be engaged with awareness. This mask also affects relationships. The person who controls cannot truly connect. They listen to respond, not to understand. They fear intimacy because it threatens their structure. Love becomes management. They confuse respect with obedience and trust with predictability. Over time, people around them feel unseen, and they themselves feel lonely despite their authority. In society, the mask of control appears in leadership and institutions. Systems that value order above understanding produce conformity, but not consciousness. Rules replace reflection. The need for absolute control breeds fear, censorship, and oppression. Jung warned that what is repressed in individuals becomes magnified in collectives. The more a culture denies emotion, the more it depends on control to survive. True strength does not come from domination, it comes from integration. To face the chaos within and still remain conscious is mastery. When you drop the mask, emotions begin to flow again. Anger turns into clarity, fear turns into humility, and pain turns into compassion. The ego fears this process because it feels like losing power, but what it loses is only illusion. Letting go of control does not mean falling into disorder. It means trusting the intelligence of the psyche. Life moves with its own rhythm. When you stop resisting, you align with it. The person who accepts their vulnerability becomes unshakable, not because they control everything, but because they are no longer afraid of what they cannot control. Reclaiming feeling through awareness begins with a simple but difficult act: noticing what is happening inside you without judgment. Most people run from their emotions because they fear what they will find. They distract themselves with noise, work, or constant activity. This avoidance may keep life functional, but it leaves the inner world frozen. Jung taught that awareness is the first step toward transformation. You cannot change what you refuse to see. When awareness grows, emotions that were once buried begin to surface. You may feel sadness, anger, or emptiness that has been hidden for years. This can be uncomfortable, but it is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that life energy is returning. Each feeling carries information from the unconscious. Awareness listens to these messages instead of suppressing them. The goal is not to control emotion but to understand it. Many people mistake awareness for analysis. They think if they can explain their emotions, they have mastered them. But awareness is not intellectual. It is direct contact with experience. It means sitting with your sadness instead of naming it as depression, feeling your anger instead of labeling it as irrational, and sensing your fear without trying to escape it. In that still attention, the emotion begins to unfold and reveal its meaning. Jung saw emotion as the bridge between the conscious and unconscious. When you repress emotion, the bridge collapses and the psyche divides. Awareness rebuilds this connection. It allows communication between what you know and what you have ignored. The energy once trapped in repression becomes available for creativity, love, and insight. Feeling returns not as chaos but as vitality. Awareness requires courage. You will encounter memories you tried to forget, truths you avoided, and wounds you denied. But facing them consciously changes their power. What was once an enemy becomes a teacher. Awareness does not erase pain, it integrates it into understanding. Each emotion accepted becomes part of your strength. In everyday life, awareness can be practiced through simple presence. You pause before reacting. You breathe before judging. You ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Instead of, what should I feel? Over time, this habit restores sensitivity. You begin to notice subtler layers of emotion, tension in the body, quiet sadness, moments of joy you once overlooked. Reclaiming feeling through awareness is the return to humanity. A person who feels deeply is alive. They respond to life with authenticity, not with performance. Their empathy increases because they recognize the same emotions in others. Awareness transforms numbness into connection, repression into understanding, and pain into wisdom. Integration of darkness means confronting the parts of yourself that you have denied, feared, or judged. It is the process of meeting your shadow consciously, instead of fighting it or pretending it does not exist. Jung believed that the darkness within each person holds not only destructive power, but also creativity, strength, and truth. When you face it with awareness, it transforms from chaos into clarity. When you ignore it, it controls you from below. Darkness is not evil by itself. It is the unlived life within you. It contains instincts, desires, and emotions that the ego rejected to maintain a certain image. You learned early what was acceptable and what was not. Anger, jealousy, or ambition might have been punished or shamed. So you buried them, but the buried parts do not vanish, they grow stronger in the unconscious. They appear through projection, impulsive behavior, or sudden emotional outbursts. These eruptions are signals that your darkness wants recognition. Jung saw that integration does not happen through denial or purity. It happens through honest relationship with what you fear. When you look at your anger without justification or guilt, you begin to see what it protects. Beneath it might be pain, powerlessness, or loss. When you face envy, you may find your buried longing for growth. Every dark feeling carries a message. The goal is not to destroy these impulses, but to understand their purpose and place them under conscious direction. In mythology and religion, the descent into darkness is a universal theme. Heroes enter the underworld, confront monsters, and return transformed. Jung interpreted this as a psychological truth. The journey through darkness is not symbolic fantasy, it is the real work of inner transformation. The monster is your denied self. When you face it and survive, you gain the energy it once held hostage. That energy becomes insight, courage, and authenticity. Avoiding darkness leads to moral blindness. People who deny their own aggression or lust often judge others harshly. They project their darkness outward, dividing the world into good and evil. This projection causes conflict in families, communities, and nations. Jung warned that the refusal to integrate darkness within leads to collective destruction. The evil we see in the world mirrors what humanity refuses to face in itself. Integration demands humility. You must accept that you are not only light, but also capable of harm, deceit, and rage. This awareness does not make you worse, it makes you real. When you own your darkness, you stop being possessed by it. You become responsible instead of reactive. You can channel that energy into creation rather than destruction. In personal growth, integration feels like tension. Two opposites, light and dark, good and bad, exist within you. The task is not to eliminate one, but to hold both consciously. Out of this tension, a higher awareness emerges. Jung called it the self, the center that embraces all parts of the psyche. Integration of darkness is the heart of transformation. It turns guilt into understanding, fear into strength, and shame into compassion. When you no longer run from your shadow, you recover your wholeness. You become a person who can stand in truth without illusion, a person who acts from awareness instead of denial. This is real power. The power to live fully awake in both your light and your darkness. Inner fire is the living energy of the soul. It is the quiet force that drives growth, passion, and meaning. When it burns brightly, you feel alive. When it fades, you drift through life without direction or purpose. Jung saw this fire as the expression of the self, the deeper center of being that guides you toward wholeness. It is not physical energy, it is psychological vitality, the power that moves you to act, create, and transform. Every person is born with this fire in childhood. It shows as curiosity and imagination. You explore, question, and feel intensely. As you grow, the world teaches you restraint. You learn what is acceptable, what is rewarded, and what is forbidden. Slowly you trade authenticity for approval. Each compromise dims the fire a little more. By adulthood, many people live on the surface, efficient but empty. The body functions, the mind works, but the soul is cold. This loss of inner fire is not sudden. It happens quietly through repetition, fear, and self-betrayal. Every time you ignore your intuition, every time you silence your truth, the flame weakens. People often mistake this emptiness for peace or maturity, but it is resignation. Jung warned that such lifeless order hides deep despair. Without inner fire, a person cannot evolve. They exist, but they do not live. Reclaiming this fire requires honesty. You must look at how you lost it. Did you trade your dreams for safety? Did you suppress your creativity to fit into a system? Did you abandon your emotional life to appear strong? Awareness of these choices reignites the first spark. The soul begins to stir when you stop pretending. Passion returns not through excitement but through alignment with truth. This fire is not about intensity or constant activity. It is the steady warmth of authenticity. It fuels compassion, not aggression. It gives courage to face pain without collapse and joy without fear of loss. When the inner fire burns steadily, you respond to life instead of reacting to it. You become resilient, adaptable, and clear. Jung often said that modern people suffer not from lack of information, but from lack of meaning. Inner fire is the source of meaning. It connects you to purpose beyond survival. It tells you when something is true or false for your soul. When you ignore it, you feel numb or anxious. When you follow it, you feel at peace even in difficulty. This is the voice of the self guiding you toward wholeness. Societies that lose this inner fire fall into conformity. They replace inspiration with entertainment and wisdom with distraction. They produce comfort but not depth. Jung believed that renewal begins with individuals who protect their inner flame. Each person who lives with awareness keeps light alive in a dark age. To awaken your fire, you must feed it with truth. Express what you have hidden. Create what you have delayed. Allow emotion to move through you instead of containing it. The fire grows with honesty and dies with pretense. You cannot fake vitality. You can only live it. Inner fire as soul energy is the essence of transformation. It turns suffering into insight and isolation into purpose. It burns away illusion and reveals what is real. When this fire burns within you, life ceases to be a series of tasks and becomes a conscious journey. The person who guards this fire does not fear darkness, because they carry their own light. Wholeness is the natural goal of the human psyche. It is not perfection, success, or moral purity. It is the full integration of all that you are, both light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and limitation. Jung believed that wholeness is not something you achieve through effort, but something you uncover by facing yourself completely. The psyche strives toward balance, and every experience, joy, pain, conflict, serves that movement toward inner unity. Most people chase perfection instead of wholeness. They try to remove flaws, control emotions, and appear consistent. This effort creates division within the self. The ego takes charge and tries to manage what should evolve naturally. It builds an image of the ideal self, and hides everything that contradicts it. This is how fragmentation begins. The more you try to appear whole, the more divided you become. Wholeness requires honesty, not performance. Jung observed that the unconscious continually seeks integration. When you ignore certain aspects of yourself, they return through dreams, symptoms, and relationships. Life brings situations that force you to meet what you rejected. A person who avoids anger meets it in others. One who denies vulnerability experiences constant defeat. These repetitions are not accidents. They are the psyche's attempt to restore balance. Until you face what you deny, you remain incomplete. Wholeness involves tension. It means holding opposites without collapsing into one side. You can be strong and afraid, kind and assertive, rational and emotional. The ego resists this because it prefers simplicity. It wants clear identity and control. But real growth happens in contradiction. Jung called this process the union of opposites. From that union emerges the self, the center that contains all sides of your nature in harmony. Reaching wholeness requires inner dialogue. You must listen to the voices within, the wounded child, the critic, the dreamer, the shadow, and treat each as part of you. When you stop identifying with one side and rejecting the others, you begin to feel inner peace. Conflict does not disappear, but it loses its violence. You understand that no part of you is the enemy. Every part has a role in your evolution. Wholeness also extends beyond the personal. When individuals become integrated, societies become more conscious. Division within people creates division among people. A world led by fragmented individuals becomes a world of conflict. Jung believed that the healing of civilization depends on the inner healing of its members. Each person who becomes whole reduces the collective chaos. The path to wholeness is lifelong. It demands reflection, courage, and humility. It asks you to see your illusions, accept your contradictions, and take responsibility for your choices. There is no final moment of completion. Wholeness is dynamic, a constant movement toward greater consciousness. Each challenge, loss, or insight adds another piece to your inner structure. When you live from wholeness, you stop seeking external validation. You act from inner necessity, rather than social pressure. You accept your flaws as teachers and your pain as a guide. You begin to see life not as a series of problems but as a process of becoming. Wholeness gives depth to experience and stability to identity. A person who attains wholeness stands firmly in reality. They do not need to be flawless or superior, they are simply authentic. They have met their darkness and found light within it. They know that the purpose of life is not to escape pain, but to become conscious through it. Wholeness is the end of inner division and the beginning of true freedom. The most dangerous sign in a person is not aggression or sadness. It is emotional emptiness. When you stop feeling, you stop evolving. Feel deeply, even when it hurts. Because feeling is proof that your soul is still alive.